Hello and good evening. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you are watching Gravitas. On the big discussion tonight, a brazen attack on a Sufi shrine in Sindh province of Pakistan, at least 75 killed and more than 200 injured. The attack is the worst so far this year. Authorities have blamed terrorists based in Afghanistan this time. But why is Pakistan becoming a soft target? What's the way ahead? What needs to be done? To get a perspective on what is happening in Pakistan, we are joined tonight by Taha Siddiqui, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief based in Islamabad, Sushant Surya, Senior Fellow of the Vivekananda International Foundation, and also with me in the studio is WION's Senior Editor Surya Gangadharan. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining Gravitas tonight. Before we plunge headlong into the discussion tonight, I want us to revisit the story of the terror attack last night in Pakistan. 10 terror attacks have taken place in 5 days, at a time when the authorities there were claiming to have effectively eradicated terrorist networks in countrywide military operations. More in this report by WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui.
10 attacks in 5 days. This has been the deadliest week in Pakistan after relative calm last year. The Taliban have vowed more attacks in the coming days. In a message sent to WION's Pakistan Bureau, they referred to the latest onslaught as Operation Ghazi. Thursday's attack on a Sufi shrine in Sindh was claimed by the Islamic State group. However, experts say that the Taliban and the IS have been working together in Pakistan and claim responsibility depending on the nature of the attack. For example, if the civilians are targeted, the IS claims it. But if government or military officials are targeted, then the Taliban come forward to claim responsibility. The attacks come in the wake of terror threat alerts issued by intelligence agencies. Experts believe that despite such forewarnings of terror attacks and strict vigilance by authorities, the Taliban's ability to carry out attacks wherever they want reflects a major security failure. The Pakistani government's response so far is to describe these attacks as a foreign conspiracy hashed in neighboring Afghanistan. They have closed down border crossings with Afghanistan, including at Torkham, for an indefinite period, and have summoned Afghan diplomats to general headquarters. The diplomats have been asked to take action against some 76 terrorists who the Pakistan Army claims are based in Afghanistan. However, given that Pakistan shares a 2,400 kilometers long porous border with Afghanistan, security experts say closing the border is at best a cosmetic measure to calm public anger over the deaths of more than 100 people in less than a week. The local media is also reporting a countrywide crackdown in which scores of suspects have been arrested and at least 25 killed. If nothing else, it gives the public a sense of the government being proactive in taking on terrorists. Taha Siddiqui, WION, Islamabad.
All right, I want to quickly go across to Taha Siddiqui, who joins us tonight from Islamabad. Taha, such a brazen terror attack despite warnings and strict vigilance. What do you make of this worrying trend, Taha?
Well, that's what everybody is questioning in Pakistan too, the fact that there were terror threat alerts, and despite that, there have been these 10 attacks in 5 days, and the Taliban have vowed to have more attacks in the coming days. So there's a big question being raised about the preventive intelligence and what the intelligence networks are doing, especially the military, because they control mostly the security policy. So because of which there are a lot of questions that are being raised and a lot of fingers being pointed. But the Pakistani state's response that we've seen is mostly to focus more on, in the report I mentioned also, on a foreign conspiracy, on shifting the blame to Afghanistan and not looking within and not reviewing and not questioning why the intelligence failure at this level is happening. No heads are rolling, no questions are being asked.
Right, Taha. Going to you, Sushant. Sushant, your thoughts on this? Is it security failure, intelligence failure, or just unpreparedness?
No, I don't think it's either a security failure or an intelligence failure. Neither is it unpreparedness. I think the real problem is twofold. One is that when you prematurely declare victory, as has been the case in Pakistan, the kind of chest thumping which was done and the kind of image building of the former army chief, that, he's sorted it all out, this problem has virtually, the back of the terrorists has been broken, all that nonsense which we were hearing. it was clearly not the case because the root of the problem continued to exist. And the root of the problem, in a manner of speaking, is the kind of denial which is there in Pakistan. And I think Taha mentions about it, that when you start indulging in conspiracy theories and you're not willing to look at where the nub of the problem lies, then obviously you're chasing ghosts. You're not fighting the problem the way it needs to be fought. And the problem is not so much that some of these characters might be operating from inside ungoverned areas in Afghanistan or from inside Pakistan, or the fact that politicians inside Pakistan, including security officials in Pakistan, have been, flirting with some of these groups, which also have a nexus with the groups which are targeting the Pakistani state, and it's virtually a witch's brew of sorts. So you're not addressing those issues, but you're looking for ghosts in either Afghanistan, India, Israel, Mars, Africa, somewhere or the other. Obviously, you're not going to be able to strike this problem the way it needs to be. And the nub of the problem is really the growing extremism in the society, which actually gives these fellows an endless stream of recruits. And that is something nobody is willing to address. They are willing to ban Valentine's Day because, according to some idiotic judge in Pakistan, it's un-Islamic. But you're not willing to ban these organizations or crack down on these organizations. And there's been a lot of criticism of that inside Pakistan as well. So I think it's a combination of these two factors which is what we are seeing now.
So, Shant, these days it seems everybody is doing or conducting diplomacy through Twitter. We saw Donald Trump do it, and it seems Pakistan Army Chief General Bajwa is no exception either. Now, before I come to the question, I want to quickly quote what he has said in the last few hours, and this again via Twitter. He says, recent terrorist acts are being executed on directions of hostile powers and from sanctuaries in Afghanistan. That's one tweet. The second says, each drop of nation's blood shall be avenged, and avenged immediately. No more restraint for anyone, unquote. Sushant, what do you make of these tweets? What's he pointing the finger at? What's he trying to say here?
No, I think he's pointing the finger at the, at the usual suspects in the Pakistani lexicon, which is India, Afghanistan, like I said, America, Israel, the works. They really don't know who's behind it, who is responsible for it. The ones who are actually responsible for it, they don't want to attack. But this kind of bluff and bluster is a very Punjabi thing to do. We have this habit from the part of the world I come from. We have this, there's a word for it called badak. So we have this habit of badak lagana, and that is what he is doing. The point is that it's rather disingenuous of the Pakistanis to blame the Afghans. You created a situation in Afghanistan where you forced many of the foreign troops to withdraw. You created a situation where the terrorists whom you supported for the last 15 years were able to create ungoverned areas in Afghanistan. And you have allowed Afghan terrorists to continue to stay in your country because you say that you don't want to fight against them because, there will be big problems for you later on. But you want the Afghans who are finding it difficult to control their own country to actually take action against the guys who might be taking advantage of the ungoverned spaces which were created by you in the first place. So I don't know what the Pakistanis are trying to get at, but clearly they've been playing with fire and now they're getting singed because of it.
Right. Sushant and Taha, please stay on. I want to bring Surya into the discussion now. Surya, the report we just saw mentioned something that should be worrying the Pakistanis, especially that the IS and the Taliban seem to be working together. So what can be done to address that? What's your take on that?
I think it's been evident for some time that terror groups tend to collude.
Right.
And especially in areas like FATA, where you have large ungoverned spaces. Clearly, it's fairly easy for these groups to get together, find common cause, and you have somebody like the Haqqanis, who I understand are now among the major players in that part of the world. They do have some kind of government backing, and they serve as some kind of an umbrella group for many of these forces on the ground. So you have some that are able to target the Pakistanis, some that target the Afghans. And this kind of thing will happen. I mean, when terror groups with a common agenda get together, I presume this is inevitable.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I want to quickly take a moment or two to share some more data or statistics with our viewers. Now, lately, Pakistan has been at the receiving end of terror attacks, with many happening just this week. 13 people were killed in a suicide bombing in Lahore on Monday. 2 policemen were killed in Quetta on Tuesday while trying to defuse a bomb. At least 7 were killed on Wednesday in 2 separate bombings, one in Mohmand and the other in Peshawar. And 3 troops, including an army captain, were killed in Awar on early Thursday after their convoy was targeted with a bomb. Now, Taha, so many attacks in quick succession. The public should be running out of patience now. What's being done? What's your take, Taha?
Well, the public is angry, and we've seen that, because of which the Pakistan Army has taken some cosmetic steps, as they're being called now. For example, the closure of the Pak-Afghan border. Now, we normally know that the militants, if they are infiltrating from the Afghanistan side, because some of them are based in the Afghan side, the Pakistani Taliban, they fled there. But if they do infiltrate, they do not use the regular border crossings, and that is what has been closed down to sort of satisfy the public anger here, to pacify the public. Also, at the same time, the Afghan diplomats have been called in at the military headquarters, and they've been given a list of 76 terrorists. Now, we do not know who these terrorists are, what their affiliation is, what have they done, what proof does the military have about these terrorists. None of that has been shared, just the information that 76 terrorists have to be handed from Afghanistan to Pakistan. So again, as I was saying, the shifting of blame, that is what we're seeing even in the response, and sort of how to satisfy and pacify the public. That's what we're seeing, that this whole blame game happening in this deflection policy, and which is actually satisfying the public, because we've seen that on local media, the public on the road, some people that I've spoken to, they say that yes, the problem is from Afghanistan, it's the problem emits from there, and so it's working, this strategy and this propaganda.
Right, Taha. Sushant, you heard Taha mention about a list purportedly containing some list or names of terrorists. Now, if I were to ask you, Sushant, sounds familiar? I mean, India has been exchanging lists forever now without any progress, any move at all on the part of Pakistan. So, is the shoe on the other foot now?
Well, the shoe's been on the other foot for a fair bit of time now. See, the point is that the list of 20 we give, we can also give them actually clear addresses, and they've been living under the protection of the Pakistani intelligence agencies. So all of them, their whereabouts are known, their involvement in terror attacks in India is known, and all of that is known. In the case of these fellows, and some of the names which have been, spoken about in the Pakistani media, people like Fazlullah and even this fellow Umar Khalid Khorasani and the others, these are guys who are living in places where the writ of the Afghan government really doesn't run. So for the Pakistanis to ask the Afghans that you catch hold of these guys and hand them over to us, either they are preparing the ground for some kind of military intervention unauthorized by the Afghan state into these areas, which is effectively invading another country, which they call a brotherly country, or it is just, trying to satisfy this whole urgings among the people that the Pakistan authorities are taking action or taking, what they call in the typical Urdu, aankh se mein aankh dal karke baat kar rahe hain. That kind of nonsense is going on. The bottom line is that the Pakistani state has to change its paradigm. It has to stop flirting with these terrorist groups. It cannot take a position that a terrorist like Hafiz Saeed is kosher, but somebody else is not. It cannot say that we will talk to the Chinese and we will, leverage our relationship with them and ask them to, put a kind of a veto on the UN proscription of a guy like Masood Azhar. You cannot be doing all of this. And incidentally, Masood Azhar's organization and these guys who are currently striking the Pakistani state and the Pakistani people have very close links. So unless you're going to be able to get your act together, be clear in your heads what you want to do, you're not going to be able to get rid of this problem. You might temporarily put some kind of a hold on these guys, but eventually these fellows are going to regroup and come back and bite you, which is what is happening right now.
Right. I want to pose this next question to both you, Sushant, and Surya. To Surya first. Surya, we're talking about India, Pakistan, Afghanistan and the issue of terrorism and how Pakistan has chosen to behave all these years. Let's talk a bit about the US in all of this and US aid in particular to Pakistan, both military and monetary aid to Pakistan. I remember a former Indian National Security Advisor, Shiv Shankar Menon, had this to say about US aid to Pakistan. He said it's like giving alcohol to an alcoholic. Now, I want to ask you first, Surya, and then I'll take this question to Sushant. Why is the US doing this? Why is the US turning a blind eye, as it were, to Pakistan? What stops the US from calling Pakistan's bluff?
I think if you look at it, Pakistan and the US have had a long history, dating back to the 1950s. And there's a strong constituency, whether in the State Department or in the Pentagon. They've been dealing with the Pakistanis, they know them very well. And the Pakistanis are useful to them. I mean, where else will you find an army which is prepared to do the kind of things you want done?
Right.
So in that sense, I don't think the Americans have given up on the Pakis as yet. I think they still hope that somewhere down the line, the Pakistanis will see sense and they could be more amenable to pursuing American interests in Central Asia and elsewhere. Until then, perhaps they're prepared to persevere. The point is, under Trump, is that going to change? There are some indications that he's not prepared to go along as before. But we really don't know, because the groups in the State Department and the Pentagon are so there, and have been so strongly vested in Pakistan, that perhaps this may not happen.
Right. I'll take that same question to you, Sushant. Sushant, what do you make of the US role, good or bad, in all of this? I mean, what stops or prevents the US from calling Pakistan's bluff? Why continue to give US aid, military, monetary, to Pakistan in spite of Pakistan's attitude towards the issue of terrorism, especially cross-border terrorism directed against India?
No, see, I don't think the Americans are going to do anything to the Pakis because of what they do to India. I think the issue is, will they be doing it in their own self-interest? One problem, which is a real problem for the Americans, is that they continue, because they have troops in Afghanistan, they continue to depend upon the lines of communication which run through Pakistan to supply their troops. Now, you can't be declaring a country a terrorist country, or can't be turning the screws on them so hard that they stop your supply lines. After that, how do you pull your troops out? You have not done anything to improve your relations with Iran. The Russian relationship is broken as it is. So how do you supply your troops? So I think that is a compulsion which is understandable. But apart from that, I think what Surya said is quite right. There is this, and incidentally, that touching belief that maybe one day the penny will drop and the Pakistanis will see the light of the day and will actually reform, turn over a new leaf and all of that. That kind of romanticizing of what Pakistan is also happening in India.
Right.
You will hear any number of people in India say, but for how long will they carry on? I think one day they will turn around. It's been 70 years, it's not happened. I don't see it happening in the next 70. But if the Americans and the Indians want to fool themselves about the nature of the Pakistani state, then what do? So I think there is that kind of romanticization that maybe one fine day, if we remain engaged, we keep encouraging them to do the right thing, they will eventually start doing the right thing. It hasn't happened in the last 15 years. It's not happened with us in the last 70. It's unlikely to happen in the foreseeable future.
Right, absolutely. Coming to you, Taha, now you mentioned about a list of 76 odd terrorists which Pakistan has shared with the Afghan officials. In fact, the Afghan diplomats were summoned to the GHQ, as it were, and shared the list and told in so many words to either hand them over or do what is necessary to deal with them. You also mentioned about some reports which suggest that at least 40 to 100 suspected terrorists have been eliminated in retaliation to yesterday's attack. The government has also sealed the Afghanistan border at Torkham and other places. Now, in your estimation, Taha, will this all help?
Well, these are steps that we've seen in the past also. We've seen these demands from the Pakistani government of handing over terrorists from Afghanistan. We've seen the border closures. We've seen these crackdowns across the country. But then again, we've seen that these militants are able to regroup with themselves. They're able to penetrate in mainland Pakistan, and mainly because some point finger towards the existence of good Taliban networks within the country and which facilitate these bad Taliban, and the good Taliban being the Afghan Taliban or the Kashmiri Mujahideen, which are present in different parts of Pakistan, and the state sort of turns a blind eye towards them. So in that sense, we see that there is some sort of respite and usually a break and a calm that we saw, for example, in 2016, last year, when terrorism actually went down. But again, this year, starting again, we're seeing that the monster has grown its head back in a way, to so to speak, and they're back again, and they're fully capable, and they have the capacity to strike Pakistan anywhere they want. So these measures, whether or not they will bring any long-term results, that we are unsure of. But short-term, yes, we might see another respite because of this sort of this crackdown and this pressure that the Pakistani government is under, and it's responding to.
Right, Taha. I'll ask you all to stay on, please, while I also delve into another related issue. Now, amid these attacks, General Qamar Javed Bajwa has said something unusual of a Pakistani army chief. He reportedly told a gathering of army officers at GHQ in Rawalpindi last December to read an American academic's book on how India has succeeded in keeping the military out of politics. Now, Surya, what do you read into these lines by the Pakistani army chief?
Well, the point is, what was the general intending? Was he trying to send a message that the job of the military is to stay strictly within certain parameters, not get involved in politics? That goes against the very grain of the Pakistani military. So, I mean, like Taha was saying earlier, you'd require at least perhaps 7 or 8 other General Bajwas to follow each other in succession to be able to bring about some kind of change within the Pakistani military. So, I mean, I think perhaps it was just a kind of telling his people that we need to begin changing. I don't know whether he actually meant that or meant something else. We'll have to, figure out how it works.
All right, fair enough. So, Sushant, is General Bajwa making a statement of intent to his commanders and junior officers, or it's an assurance to his people at large? What kind of assurance could that be, Sushant?
Look, I think it's a little premature to say whether actually he is trying to change the orientation of the military and the involvement of the military in the politics of the country, assuming that something like that can be done by one man, at the helm of affairs. But clearly, the reputation with which General Bajwa has come into office is that he's a guy who doesn't believe in political interference or an overbearing sort of a military role in the politics and the running of the country. But having said that, and perhaps because that is the way he is oriented personally, he is trying to, gradually push the army into a kind of a state of mind where they'll allow the politicians and the civilians to run the affairs of the state, and they act as actually an institution of the state rather than the masters of the state. But having said that, how successful he will be, whether the message he's trying to convey to his officers will actually resonate within the military hierarchy, or whether people will try and create situations. And we know that this kind of a thing has happened earlier, where the lower level people have done things which have, in a sense, forced the hands of the army chief, and forced him to actually turn around and continue to play the role which the army chiefs have always played in Pakistan. So I think it's still very, very early days, but whether he will be able to do something like that is very difficult to say at this point in time.
Indeed. Taha, you've heard Surya and Sushant speak there. What's been the response to this statement from Bajwa? Taha?
Well, basically, we have been hearing that this new army chief is sort of an apolitical person, and that's why he was chosen, and other generals were superseded, and Nawaz Sharif thinks that he will not interfere in politics. But we saw that with previously, we saw Nawaz Sharif having a similar experience with Musharraf back in the 90s, when he thought that this man was from a different ethnic background, from a minority Urdu-speaking background, somebody who wasn't very ambitious and did not want to sort of influence and dominate the military like a Punjabi military chief would have. But then Musharraf went on to do a coup against Nawaz Sharif. Similarly, Rahil Sharif, when he came into power, we saw him also giving out such apolitical statements. So a lot of people are skeptical about it because, as Sushant, the last guest, he was saying, the military itself forces generals to act in a certain way because of the institutional thinking, and it is very hard to prevail over that.
Right, Taha. And I also want you to very quickly weigh in on one other issue. We heard Azaz Ahmad Chaudhry, the former Pakistan Foreign Secretary and the new Pakistan ambassador to the US, say only recently that the Taliban were in Pakistan or invited as migrants, and that they were welcome to stay as long as they steer clear of any terrorist attacks or any inimical activities against Pakistan. What do you make of that, given the fact that the talks with Taliban, is off again, on again talks? So what's the status of the Taliban talks? And also, what do you make of the Pakistan Army's recent attitude towards the terrorist group?
As Afghan Taliban are concerned, we do know that they're based out of Balochistan, and some of them are based in FATA. For example, the Haqqani network have been relocated to some other places, and there are enough reports, ground reports that I did receive from my sources, which talk about their existence over there. The fact that the former foreign secretary and the new ambassador said this is something that Sartaj Aziz also said recently about how the Afghan Taliban are supposed to not do any militant activity, and they're just taking refuge here and they're just escaping war. But again, we do know that they're the ones who are fighting in Afghanistan. They're the ones who, for example, the Haqqani network is running the military command of the Taliban. So in that sense, they take refuge here. The Pakistan government tries to justify it by saying they're just taking refuge and they're not involved in any militant activity. But on the ground, the reality is much different.
Right, Taha. Coming to you, Sushant. Sushant, before I pose this next question to you, I want to quickly quote Kevin Halbert, a former CIA station chief in Pakistan. He has most recently described Pakistan as, quote, most dangerous country, unquote. And he cites, one or two factors behind his analysis or conclusion. One, he talks about the failing economy. To begin with, he talks about rampant terrorism. These are his words. And third, Pakistan has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal. Last but not the least, he's the sixth largest population in the world and one of the highest birth rates. So, Sushant, what do you make of this assessment, and what can countries such as the US, India or even China can do to lean on Pakistan? In other words, what will it take for the international community, in Pakistan included, for it to rein these terrorist groups?
See, I think the kind of parameters which the CIA analyst has spoken about, I think there's a recent book by a former Indian RAW official, and the title of the book pretty much sums up the problem in Pakistan, and he calls it Coating the Abyss. And what he does is that he actually goes into long-term trends which are practically which are actually very scary. And when you add those long-term trends in terms of water availability, energy, population growth, education and all of that, when you add all of that together, and on top of that you put in terrorism, you put in extremism, you put in a very large army and all the other stuff, it is actually a very, very dangerous situation. Now, the problem is that no matter what anybody else wants to do, and frankly, I think as an Indian, I am up to my neck in trying to rescue Pakistan. We've been trying to do it since 1950, and practically every administration in India has this sense that we must try and rescue Pakistan from itself, which is utter nonsense. I don't think we have much leverage or any kind of a political capital to do any such thing, and we shouldn't even attempt it. If we can save ourselves, very good. As for the Americans, they've been trying to do the same thing, and look what they've had to suffer for their 15 years in Afghanistan. And finally, the Chinese are now jumping in and trying to do something and pumping in money into Pakistan. But look, until and unless certain basic structural inconsistencies in how the Pakistani state is run, until those are going to be addressed. And to my mind, extremism is at the heart of most of these problems. So, for example, if you want to control population, the mullahs will come on the street and, raise hell on the streets, and everybody will back off. How do you control population when even ordinary middle class families like yours and mine will have 5, 6 kids? It's crazy. Out here, if anybody has a third child, he's looked at as though he's come from some, he's some kind of an alien who's come into our society. But the norm in Pakistan, and I'm talking about a lot of friends of mine who have, half a dozen kids. So it's crazy when you have this kind of an attitude and nobody is willing to reform it. How do you address these problems? Until and unless you have an 8% growth rate, how will you have an 8% growth rate if you continue to spend money on building up defense facilities, building up your nuclear arsenal, building up keeping a very large standing army, spending on a whole lot of security paraphernalia, but not on, the human development of your people. So you are looking at this volcano which is bubbling, and one fine day, unless corrective action is taken, it is going to burst. There's nothing anybody can do about it. Any money you put in out there is money down the tube.
Absolutely, Sushant. Surya, let's talk a bit about the latest terrorist attack in Pakistan, and the IS has claimed responsibility for it. Now, the IS, or the advent of the Islamic State in Pakistan, along with the already existing terrorist group directed against India, isn't that a combustible mix, which only means more sleepless nights for the Indian establishment?
Well, I think this is something we've dealt with for a long time. The point is, who is the immediate enemy of the Islamic State there? Is it the Pakistani state or is it India? I would presume that they would want to look for a safe sanctuary in Pakistan first. So their immediate target would be to sensitize the area around them. So I would believe that they would target Pakistan first. I would think they would. And perhaps India will come later.
Sure. Coming to you, Taha. Taha, what do you make of these, the spate of attacks targeting the minorities in particular, the Shia community, the Ahmadiyyas? What's the sense, your take on this mood within these communities, and what the implications for Pakistan going forward?
Well, everybody is worried, and especially the minorities, religious minorities are worried. We've seen that many of them have migrated out of Pakistan. The Christians, the Hindus headed to the West, or even some Hindus have left for India. And we've seen that attacks against minorities have been increasing, and attacks against sort of the peaceful Islam version, the different sectarian version. And mostly these attacks come from hardliner Islamists who are following a Saudi Wahhabi Islam. And the state also endorses that. The state's madrasa networks or the mosque networks also follow this brand of ideology, and because of which it is quite alarming, and especially alarming for the minorities.
Right. And if I can just take that same question to you, Sushant, the combustible mix, as it were, of both the IS and the various terrorist groups directed against India, what do you make the challenges going forward for India in the immediate environment or the neighborhood?
See, really, Rajesh, I think we are overblowing this whole ISIS business. I think it suits the deep state of Pakistan to play it up because, they play upon the fears of the Chinese, the Russians and everybody else, and it pretty much works for them. But the fact of the matter is, what is the IS as far as Pakistan is concerned? It is essentially the same guys. It's a spin-off or, a morphing of the same guys who earlier were the Huji and the Harkatul Mujahideen and the Lashkar-e-Taibas. Some of those guys broke up. They went and joined the TTP. The TTP has broken up and they've become the IS. Tomorrow, if you finish the IS, but you don't attack the extremism which is giving birth to these guys, you will have something else coming up. So the issue is not so much IS to my mind. And as far as India is concerned, see, we seem to be focusing a lot on the radical Islamists in Pakistan, and we are expressing our fears that if these guys actually start gaining a lot of power inside Pakistan, then there's going to be a lot of trouble for us. But let me take you back to a time. when the radical Islamists were not ruling the roost in Pakistan.
Right.
Let's talk about the 50s, 60s and even the 70s, when Pakistan, at least for the rest of the world, was a pretty normal, moderate sort of a country. Islam was there, but Islam was not the primary marker of identity, certainly not the kind of Islam which is now being spoken about. Let us face it, even at that point of time, it is not exactly that the case that the Pakistanis were very well disposed towards India. So I don't know what we are talking about. Just because there are these guys, who are wearing the kind of clothes which these Taliban wear, makes very little difference to us, because the guys who are wearing three-piece suits were not exactly very well disposed towards us. They were trying to damage India in every which way possible. Whether it was in sponsoring dirty wars in the northeast, whether it was doing Punjab, whether it was doing Kashmir, whether it was Operation Gibraltar, you name it, they've done it. So what the hell are we guys talking about?
Right. Surya, we are in less than 5 days from now, we can expect Foreign Secretary Jaishankar to pay a visit to China for the first strategic dialogue. Now, I assume that many things will be on the agenda, including, for instance, India's quest for the Nuclear Suppliers Group membership. We can expect both sides to talk about the One China policy in light of Tibet, Taiwan, maybe the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and last but not the least, the issue of Masood Azhar. Now, in the light of all that's happening in Pakistan and especially in our neighborhood, do you at all expect or anticipate China to formulate its stand or relent from its position on some of these issues?
I think as long as China sees Pakistan as its Israel, an entity which is there to ensure that India remains within the South Asia kind of framework, I think until that changes, we're not going to see much progress on that front.
Right. On that note, gentlemen, we are unfortunately running out of time. It's a wrap on this bulletin.